this is probably the single most useful add-on for texture painting in Blender. I mean, just look at this rating. Nice. It's called, well, I call it Ucupaint, but I believe it's actually pronounced Ucupaint?
Ucupaint?
After the developer of it. I already have it installed, but it's pretty easy to install add-ons these days. They've got the same where you can drag and drop it into Blender, or you can download it and then go into Blender and your edit preferences and click on this little thing and go install from disk and then find that zip file that you downloaded. So what you need to do to get going is click over on the Texture Paint tab and then click on this little thing here, or you can hit the in button on your keyboard. And I've got a whole bunch of add-ons installed, so there's a whole bunch of things here. You just scroll down toward the bottom. Well, first of all, we need to add a mesh that we can paint on. Shift A, mesh. Let's go with a sphere. And I'm gonna right click and shade smooth on that. Okay, now that I've got a mesh, we can go down to Ucupaint and then click on the quick setup, and we can just go with the default there. Sometimes this takes a minute, so don't worry if it's sitting there for a while. It has to build a bunch of shaders, so just give it a minute. It should come back eventually. The thing with Ucupaint is you want to do a non-destructive style drawing. Like, you can just use it with layers like you've got in Photoshop. That's a really nice feature. But the way I like to use it is by adding solid colors, and then we'll mask what we want. So let's start off with like a red. So now we've got a red sphere, and then we can add another layer, and we can do a solid color with an image mask, which will allow us to mask that color. So let's go with a different color. Let's just go with blue. And you can select different resolutions here. So if you're doing a low res thing, you can even do a custom resolution if you want to do something a little bit lower, like 256. Just kind of pick what's appropriate for you. Sometimes it's nice to use a higher resolution that you can then scale down later when you bake it out. In this case, we want the mask color to be black, so it's going to be fully transparent by default, and then we'll paint in the colors. So now we've got that, and you'll notice we're still red because the blue is completely transparent. So what we're going to do is go over to Texture Paint mode, and if you notice that these colors aren't showing up, like maybe it's a solid black sphere instead, make sure you click on this little viewport shading sphere. The second from the right is the one you want usually. Now we can paint this in, and you notice right now it's not quite fully blue, and that is because the color that I have selected here is not fully white. So if you have issues with that, make sure you're using a fully white color. Now when we paint in, we can paint in a blue color. And you may notice there's a whole bunch of different options here. It can be kind of overwhelming. A lot of these are just shortcuts. So for example, I can add a solid color here. Let's do green so it's different. And then I can add a mask later. So now I can go in and add a new image mask and select a resolution. And it's going to be white by default if I add it this way. So you probably want that to be black. And select that. And now we can paint in green, like so. The other cool thing is we can add height and normal map information. So if we click on the color channels down here, you'll see we've got the color, which is the only thing we're using right now, but there's also metallic, roughness, and bump. So if we check on bump, you'll notice that the green is elevated just a little bit here. Now it is using the layer color. So if I actually change the layer color here, you can see that it kind of bumps up and recesses, especially if I go with a dark color. If I use black, it's going to recess completely, and that's because we're using a mid-level of 0.5, which means anything below 0.5 is going to be recessed, and anything above 0.5 is going to bump up. But typically, what we want is to have some other color here, and then we want to set the source to a custom color. So now, if we set the custom color to white, we've got this green bumped up here. Or if we want to make it recessed, we can do that as well. Another thing to note is these may interact in unexpected ways. So if we go and add to this blue channel here, a height map, you notice the, well, first of all, let's go to custom color. You'll notice the green just kind of completely stomps on whatever the blue is doing. And what you can actually do is you can go over here and you can set the blend to add. And now we've got the bumps kind of layering on top of each other. So depending on what you're doing, you may want it to completely override with a mix, or you may want it to add together. Once you've done whatever it is you want to do here, you need to make the textures for your game. You don't want to save all these layers independently and then run that in real time in your video game. So what we need to do is click on this. It's kind of confusing because there's a bunch of gears all over the place, but the very topmost gear here, You click that, and then you click Bake All Channels, and then you specify resolution. I'm going to do a really low resolution just to make it more visible that it's baked. So now we can see we've got a much lower resolution here. If you're doing a really low poly, low res game, that might be what you want. So you can paint in a higher detail and then bake it down. And you may notice it's kind of chunkier than you might expect. So when we go to Bake All Channels, we can actually set an anti-aliasing level and then maybe bump the samples up a few and then hit OK. Now that kind of smooths it out a little bit. Of course, if you're baking super low res, there's only so much you can do there. But if your quality looks a little chunky, that may help. So now we want to save these out. So we're going to click on this gear, the bottom gear under the baked color, and do save all baked images to. I'm just going to dump this to my temp directory, but you would save this to wherever your game directory is. And now we've got 3 different images. So we've got our color channel, and we've got our displacement, which you may or may not need. I'm personally using it in Kook for self-shadowing, so that's useful to me. And then we've got the normal map here. So you can dump those out into your directory for your model and do with them what you will. Now when you want to stop using the baked images and go back to editing the masks and whatnot, just uncheck that use baked right there. And now we can go back to drawing on this. Also, if you want to draw directly in this 2D area, there's a little view and drop down and select paint. I don't know why it's not paint by default, but now you can go in and draw directly on that if you would like to. The next challenging thing with Ucupaint is getting the alpha in there. That's something I struggled with. So what you have to do is underneath the color here, you drop down this color channel and then check alpha. Now I've got a solid color layer everywhere, so we're not going to see anything there. If I turn this off, you can see now we've got alpha. But sometimes what you want to do is actually draw in the transparency. So we're going to add a new layer. Just going to do a solid color with an image mask. Color doesn't really matter because we're going to use this for alpha. So what we do is under the solid color, we click the layer source and then we click background. Now when we draw in, we're actually drawing in using the background color, which is alpha'd out. So now you can draw in some cutouts and holes and whatnot. Very useful. Now you might be wondering why use solid colors with masks as opposed to just painting on a layer, an image layer. And the answer is it makes it really easy to fine-tune the colors after the fact. For example, if you're painting something that's flesh colored and you decide you want to change the flesh tone, if you've painted all of that in one image layer, then it makes it really difficult to go in and adjust those colors later. So if you have a solid color for the skin and another color for the red tones, you can go in and change them to all kinds of different things. It also makes it easy to do a bunch of different variations of different skin tones of things on a character if you want different skins or something like that. The other reason is we can do more than just colors. So if we want to take this green color, for example, and instead of just doing a solid custom color here for the height, we can actually go in and do custom data and open an image and maybe use wood height texture. Now we've got wood texture on this, and we can maybe tweak our mid-level if we want to, or we can create a new layer and open an image. Maybe we want to add some rust or something like that. So we can go in and add a mask and then just sort of paint in little bits of rust here. That keeps setting back to that color, I don't know why. There we go. Each brush has its own color, and for some reason it keeps defaulting to that. I don't know if that's just something weird with my Blender setup, or if that's something you'll have to deal with too. Or we can just fill in that whole section. One other thing that might be kind of useful, it's really easy to accidentally paint over into another section that you don't want to be painting on. Like I'm trying to paint this little tentacle here and then it's getting onto the mouth. What you can do, this isn't specific to Ucupaint, but what you can do is click on this little paint mask. And then if we go into edit mode and just select this, and I can just control plus to select just this area. And now when I paint, I will only paint on this and I won't paint on any of this other stuff here. I can only paint on the area that's selected in edit mode. You can also We can go in and select just a specific area and fill in that, like that. So we've barely scratched the surface of what you can do in Ucupaint. There's so many different things we can do with like procedural stuff. So I'm going to try to do a procedural avocado here. So we'll start off with a base solid color layer, give it a nice dark green, maybe kind of more of a brown green, a little less saturation. Yeah, something dark. All right, and now we will add another layer, solid color. Give it a little bit of a lighter green. And we're going to add a mask, but we're not going to use an image mask that we're going to draw in. We're actually going to use some Voronoi noise. And instead of using the UV map, we will use the object, which is going to use the space of the object. Now we need to tweak parameters here, most likely the scale. Just keep cranking that up. There we go. So that is all pure procedural. It's a little bit backward. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another image mask. Note that I've got the color set to white here. And we'll do the difference, and that'll effectively invert the color there. Probably a solid color we could have added there instead of image, but anyway, you get the idea. Now the other thing we can do is we can go in and we can add a bump. Again, we want to do custom color, so we can kind of tweak that and crank that scale up to be a little more natural. And then we can add other layers to kind of fine tune that if we want, or we can just bake that down to a texture. Now we've got that as a texture. Really useful for getting a quick base that you can use to draw on top of, so you don't have to hand draw every little thing. Maybe we'll go in and add another solid color with image mask, this time kind of like a dark brown. And you know, just a little variation there, kind of makes it look a little more natural. So you can see something super quick, pretty powerful. So there you go. Quick intro to Ucupaint, or Ucupaint. Hopefully you found this useful. And if you did, consider becoming a patron like these wonderful people. Their support means a lot and encourages me to keep making content like this. So if you like what you see, maybe become a patron and suggest some other tutorials for me to make, or other types of videos you'd like to see. Until the next video,